Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Adrian Tchaikovsky is a British science fiction and fantasy writer known for a wide variety of work, including The Children of Time, Final Architecture, Dogs of War, Tyrant Philosophers and Shadows of the Apt series, as well as standalone books such as Elder Race, Doors of Eden, Spiderlight and many others. Children of Time and its series has won the Arthur C. Clarke and BSFA awards. His other works have won the British Fantasy Award, British Science Fiction Award and Sidewise Award. Well, it's lovely to see you, Adrian. The Writer's Gym is, I think you know, all about finding the habits and the exercises that mean that writing becomes a part of life that people do regularly. It comes off its pedestal and into just healthy general living. I think that's something I know you do incredibly well. And not only do I see loads and loads of personality and interest in all the amazing things you've done in your career, but I think some of it actually started with LARP and with Tabletop.
It started with Tabletop. Yeah, LARP came on a bit later because when I was doing Tabletop or when I started writing, I was in Lincolnshire, where I don't think they've even heard of LARP. I mean, that's probably unfair, but certainly I hadn't heard of LARP at the time in the 80s and 90s. I very much started off as a tabletop games master. And then I came across the Dragonlance Chronicles books, and they were someone getting a novel out of their D&D campaign. And that was the thing, that was the light bulb moment of this is a thing I could potentially do. And actually it took me quite a while to get my style up to the standard where I could in fact do it. But that was, there was at that point a road I could travel.
I'm interested in how the curiosity happened, because I'm sort of the other end of the game spectrum, that I love being the writer. I love being in my own mind and creating all of the circumstances. But with something like Tabletop, you don't have that full control. Does the sort of the teamwork of it appeal to you?
Well, I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that back in the 80s, being a games master was probably a bit more of a dictatorial tradition than now. I mean, there are multiple ways to GM and multiple game approaches to it. But back in the day with the old sort of Gary Gygax D&D, it was very much, yes, you're the games master, they're the players, and you determine what happens. And they basically get to roll dice. So creating a world for a role-playing game, creating a world for a book. Very, very similar skill set. And in fact, if you are used to creating a world for a role-playing game where the players are going to go and break things and go the places they're not supposed to and that kind of thing, it means you create a very robust world where you have a very good grasp of what exists beyond the immediate story you're trying to tell, which is enormously useful. It means that when you're writing in that world has a sense of reality it might not otherwise have. You have a feeling that the world extends beyond the book. You have other places you can go in sequels if you continue to write in that world. So it is actually, I think it's a genuinely very good place to come to writing from. The other thing is, when you are creating a world for a role-playing game, you are explicitly creating something for other people to consume. Even though it's a small group of players rather than a larger group of readers, one hopes a larger group of readers, you are still having a mind to, well, how is this going to land? What is this? What is the reaction going to be like this? Well, if I release this information, where will they go? What will they think? Is this going to misdirect them as I intend? That kind of thing. So rather than, say, just writing for your own pleasure, things that you do not ever intend to show to people, you are explicitly writing with your audience in mind, and that, I think, is incredibly valuable.
It's a really interesting use of that language, for me anyway, that where some people need to write for themselves first before they bring in somebody else. I guess that's true that there are people who are thinking that it's not possible to bring in somebody else, whereas Tabletop, you're already acknowledging we're all part of a story.
You are very, yeah. I mean, unless you're doing, I know obviously solo role-playing games like the 1,000-Year-Old Vampire and things like that are becoming a thing now. I don't particularly appeal to me, but it is definitely a part of the role-playing landscape these days. But in any other situation, you are very, very explicitly, collaborating. And the thing about, being a writer with a readership is, even though you are the one that decides what goes on the page, the reader is reading and interpreting that, and you need to be aware of what you want your reader to be thinking, what you want your reader to know, what conclusions they're jumping towards, because that's all part of the game of writing.
Do you see yourself as having evolved? Do you look at the voices and the way that you're writing now and see that reader as part of the relationship of your evolution then?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, I think that, I mean, I am sure that there are writers out there who can just write the perfect book in an ivory tower without any consideration and basically assume that the readers will come to them and the readers will shape themselves to fit in the mold of that book. That is not how I work. I am always kind of in conversation with a notional readership, I think that is, I think that gives you a lot of options, whereas if you're just writing the perfect story for you in the assumption that other people will also love it, best of luck to you. I'm sure that can be done. I'm sure some of the best writers in the world have done that. And I am possibly just not that good of a pure writer. But if you're writing with your readership in mind, you can play all sorts of fun games with them. So, for example, my novella Ogres is written in second person, which is a bit of a weird choice. It's something that people are a bit oddly icky about, except that there's a reason it's written in second person. And the point is really, as I'm writing it, to put off the realization of why it's being written in second person until the exact point I want the reader to understand what's going on. And then once they've understood what's going on, that it's very obvious all the way through the book why it was written in second person. And that's your ideal kind of twist thing in any kind of situation. You want it to be a surprise when it lands and then to have been obvious in retrospect. And I don't think you can do that without having an idea of, look, what clues am I giving my readers that they're not necessarily going to be picking up on, but which will just rattle about in their heads. And when I wrote Children of Memory, there was a large chunk of Children of Memory where the reader is explicitly not supposed to know what's going on, but be aware that something is going on that they don't understand. So basically, when things in the narrative are inconsistent or going wrong, it's not, I need to make sure really that my readership is not sitting there thinking, oh, this needed a bit of an edit. I need them to be thinking, oh, something's up.
Yes.
And by the way this is being written, it is being telegraphed to me as the reader that something is up, but I'm not being told what. So I need to be on the lookout. And obviously, like I say, hopefully they don't spot what is up. And some readers always will. You're always kind of working to a sort of a bit of a cloud, and you're just aiming at the densest part of that cloud so that you catch as many people as possible with the right rise and fall and the right beats so that they get that kind of emotional response you want. I don't think you can do that by being completely cut off from your readership. I think you need to have that sense that people are going to be reading this. You need to be chuckling, thinking, oh, they'll love that bit, or I'm an absolute stinker because of what I just pulled, or that, I'm going to get angry emails about killing off that character, that kind of thing. And I've never, because I've come out of that role-playing thing and always had that player GM relationship going on, that's always been a part of my process.
And reading the room, the sense of humour that really comes across in what you're saying, both in the process and in what you're actually writing about, having that relationship means that you're enjoying yourself, that you are sort of laughing back.
Yes, and also it's absolutely the case that there are jokes I put into my books purely because they amuse me. And in general, no one is necessarily ever going to pick up on that. And I put it in purely because I find it funny. And that's kind of my prerogative as a writer. But I think if you wrote the whole book like that, you would not necessarily get a terribly good reader or critical reception.
Yes, and that's also where the dialogue comes in, isn't it? Being aware of what the reader is taking on as we go. I mean, as you say, there will be writers who find that confidence through being in their ivory tower, through being on their own, and sort of moving back later. But it is about finding what works for you individually, isn't it? I wonder if, because our focus is about exactly that, is finding what works for ourselves and keeping those things going. May I ask, have there been ways that if you are either lacking confidence about something or falling out of the zone in any way, is there anything that has worked for you to bring yourself back to that, or is that just not what the writing experience is like for you?
Well, I mean, you get scenes where you're working through and you're just kind of aware, right, there is something here that is not working. This is feeling very flat. It's dragging something. This part of what I'm doing doesn't. I mean, it's this very weirdly ineffable sense because it's often quite hard to say, well, precisely what is wrong. You just know this isn't right. I've got a toolkit for that sort of situation. So, right, is there a different point of view that this scene is better told through? Can I tell this in a different way? So rather than just going through it beat by beat as a narrative, what about if someone was saying it was telling the story of it later on. This is just a thing that happens off the page, and then you learn about it through some other means or that kind of thing. Do I even need to show this scene if it is just plodding through? Or if there's some other way to shortcut things or turn things around, or just in some other way, what is it that I need to convey? Because and how is it best done? Because this obviously isn't the way to do it.
It's also about character and author blind spots, isn't it? Because when you go to a different point of view, different character, you do inevitably see everybody a different way.
Yes, and also, some characters are just more fun to inhabit, so that it can be as simple as that. Or the other thing is basically, do I need all of this stuff to this point? If I've just now got to the point of the scene that's important, why not start there? Do it in media res or in medias res. I can never remember which one race around it is. You start in the middle of the action, or you just find a different point that means those 2.5 pages of people kind of going from A to B or whatever just weren't actually necessary. And sometimes, writing that out in the first place can be useful because you've given yourself some mental scaffolding for where the scene is set and all of that sort of thing. But sometimes that stuff then just doesn't need to stay in. Just like scaffolding when you're building an arch, you can then take the scaffolding away. It
does really strike me as a great example of how every problem that we come up against is usually actually a signpost of some kind. It is a solution to something.
Yeah, and the thing is, you never want to hear that little nagging voice in your head saying this bit isn't working, because obviously that's going to interrupt your flow and slow you down. And you're going to have to solve the problem. But I don't know that it's ever been wrong.
What else is in the Adrian Tchaikovsky toolkit?
I mean, one of the things I've been playing with, my toolkit expands basically as I go on. I'm certainly, I would hope, a better writer now than I was when I started. I'm certainly a more confident writer, which means I can try stuff I wouldn't have dared do, like the second person for ogres, for example. When I got to Children of Time, I worked out things like, well, if you've got 2 different plot lines throughout the book that you're going to alternate through, there are things you can do to quite subtly distinguish between them, so people are never really unsure where they are. I mean, admittedly, in that case also, you're never sure which one you're with because it's the number of legs the protagonists have. But the spider plotline is in the present tense and the human plotline is in the past tense. And that emphasizes the fact that the spiders are ascendant and the humans are declining, for example. And it's not a huge thing. And a lot of people don't necessarily notice that when they read the book. But I think it absolutely colors the reading experience. It gives, if you're writing in the present tense, you have an energy and an immediacy to what is going on that the past tense doesn't have. And that was my first proper use, I think, in a long form of present tense. And I've used it a lot since.
I heard myself saying to somebody a few months ago when I was explaining how it felt to experience that difference, that present tense is coffee and past tense is tea, that it just sort of depends what energy you want, that kind of hyper.
I mean, weirdly, so my certainly first person present tense is a lot like, there is the scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail where he is fighting the Black Knight, and you see the fight through this tiny slot of the helmet. That's first person present tense. You are seeing this very narrow slice of what is going on through one character's understanding of it, and you do not see left and right. You can only see where they are looking, and that gives this enormously, it's very much like, I mean, I did my first ever schools thing a while ago, and I was explaining, look, you know what a first person computer game is like, and it really is very much like that. It maps on perfectly, because you are literally only seeing right ahead of you all the time. And that means it's enormously focused, and it's enormously claustrophobic, and it's enormously immediate in that moment.
And so much to be wrong about, which is what I think is so wonderful.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, and you can still get most of that by just doing an over-the-shoulder third person. Yeah, I mean, that's just something that Joe Abercrombie does amazingly well in his book, The Heroes, for example. There are some fights in that where it's literally, it is someone in the middle of this enormous battle, but you get to see their tiny, tiny viewpoint on this colossal chaos all around them. And their understanding of what is going on is so limited. And he pulls it off brilliantly. And I feel he's one of the writers I've learned a great deal from, honestly, because he does this sort of thing quite effortlessly.
As well as the writers that you've learned from, I don't know if this is overreading into it, but something else that I was hearing in that is the interest in insects and the way that creatures and groups of creatures smaller than us have their organisations. Was Was that always, and I have to say, did that have legs, whatever that thing is you're playing with? I can't see, because that would be a nice coincidence.
I mean, it's actually a frog.
Hello.
Yeah,
I have a frog on my bookshelf.
I do have that sort of thing on my desk as well.
Yeah, do introduce us for the listeners who are not on YouTube.
Yes, this is a sort of a fully articulated scorpion model from Bandai. There's a huge Japanese market for these things. I love them.
And who is the frog?
The frog is a horned frog. I don't do kind of names for these sort of things, and it's from the same general series. I think it's called. It translates roughly as the diversity of life, I think. But sorry, it's just one of various things I collect, and then they end up on my desk, and I just fiddle with them during interviews.
Quite right too. And if I were to ask what I know perfectly well is the unanswerable, what is it about those creatures? What makes them interesting?
Well, so I mean, I was interested in bugs and things from a very, very early age. I mean, at primary school, I was told, you will never get anywhere if you put spiders in everything, which turned out not actually to be true. But I feel that I was a very kind of weird and disaffected kid, like a lot of people are in this industry. A lot of people were, rather, in this industry. And I think I basically just decided, right, I am going to take as my tribe the thing that things that people don't like. So insects, spiders, reptiles, all of these things that basically have a bad PR. You can keep your birds and your squirrels and all these other, your pandas and all the other things that basically have enormous cheerleading communities across the world saying, well, we've got to save this and keep that. I mean, I am for bugs because, I mean, it's like the Lorax. I speak for the bugs because the bugs have no voice, except for cicadas, obviously. And that, I think, was where it began. It was just me sort of seeing something kindred in these things that basically just got a very bad press.
And the thing that you have as you're speaking about that is the one thing I wish that I could just give as a present to every developing writer who needs it, is knowing that the things I am interested in are the things for me to be writing about. The questions in my head are the things to be focusing on. Did that come naturally? Did it take a bit of a kick in the right direction?
Well, it's interesting because obviously, even before Children of Time, the Shadows of the Apt series, which is my first books, they're epic fantasy, but they're epic fantasy where everyone has insect powers. So it's there from the beginning. I think my approach to that series is probably the most useful thing, which is this. It's just that, yes, I was going to write about people with bug powers in a bug world because that was what interested me. But at the same time, and with the idea of having an eye for your audience, I wanted to produce an epic fantasy series that ticked all of the boxes that people who were reading Martin or Erickson at that time were looking for, but also then do the interesting thing that only I was going to do with it. And I think it's not necessarily the easiest road to walk, but I think if you can do it, that is kind of the place to aim for. Because you can write. I am quite an aficionado of mad books, as far as like the really, really wild, out there, new, weird stuff. But I also kind of appreciate why a lot of them don't find a wide audience, because they are much easier to read, I think, if you are already extremely literate in the conventions that they are subverting, than if you are just coming to this straight off A Song of Ice and Fire, which A Song of Ice and Fire, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, it's an extremely accessible fantasy series from the get-go because it has a load of familiar concepts. It has kings, it has dragons, it has politics, it has knights, it has all of this sort of stuff that you don't need to have a degree in something to work out what's going on with them. And then it layers on quite a lot of weirdness as the series goes on. The build-up of the magic in that series is actually quite the masterclass. But it's very accessible from the start. I think that's one big reason why it did so well at the time, was people could jump on even if they weren't hardline epic fantasy readers, more easily so than, say, Erickson, who is very weird from the beginning. And Erickson was also enormously popular, but I suspect that his popularity was more confined to existing sort of fantasy aficionados.
Yeah. Tighter glass ceiling on it.
Yeah. So, and this is where I start to deviate, but because I've mostly forgotten where I started on this particular diatribe. But Yeah, the idea, so with Shadows of the App, there was this idea I had at the time was, right, I would like to write a book that fits exactly within this general niche where there is obviously, because those books, Erickson, Martin, they were the big ones at the time, there is the big readership looking for these books like this, but also I would like it not to be Kings and Knights and Dragons. I will do it with his insect stuff. And I'm going to say I am actually creating a barrier for entry. There are people who bounce off that series because of that. And for whatever reason, I've also been completely unable to convey the fact that the people in the Shadows of the App are in fact human people and not insects, despite the fact I described them quite clearly as that in the first chapter and was aware of this as a potential problem. It completely failed, and an awful lot of people assume they're all bugs. Throughout, having read the whole series and just assumed they're bugs throughout, which, I mean, I would have done it that way if I felt I could have gotten away with it, but I didn't think I could have written a book purely about bugs at that time. And it's also worth noting, Children of Time, the book that did so extremely well for me, that was a punt. The publishers weren't particularly confident that was going to do well. And honestly, for the first year, until the Clarke thing kicked off, it wasn't doing terribly well. So
that was a lovely dismissive of the Clarke thing.
Well, I can't deny
when I won the...
Well, I mean, honestly, even from the shortlisting, that was what, it kind of got on people's radars. Yeah. It got on people's radar with that. But, it got a lot of very, very meh reviews came out. And it was, it was very much, all right, we'll let you do this one sci-fi book and then it's back to the Sword and the Dragons. And the advance was very small.
Being sent back to your room.
So, I was a fantasy author and I wanted to do this weird sci-fi about spiders, and they were good enough to let me, but it did kind of feel like I was being let do it. They weren't particularly enthusiastic about it. And obviously within a year, it was suddenly, yes, you're a sci-fi writer now and we don't want any of that fantasy nonsense. So, I mean, I guess we're talking about the conversation is three-sided, of course, because you have the author and you have the readers, you have the publishers.
You do. And the publishers are refereeing. So who knows what we think we want. I'm going to ask a little bit about the process, if that's all right. And we were saying earlier the importance of finding out what works for the individual writer. It's not about there being a right or wrong. We absolutely know that. But it's never any less interesting to know what works for individual writers. Are you a time of day person? Are you an everybody out of the doors, or between certain times? What's it like?
Historically, I've been very flexible. So when I had a day job, I could write late evening. And that was what I would do. The last thing I did before I went to bed is I would write my thing for that day. As I started to dial my day job down to part-time, I would then be writing during the afternoons, usually, in town. I would also, when I was feeling particularly buzzy with it, I would be writing in the lunchtimes and emailing what I wrote to myself on the work's email system. So probably shouldn't have been doing that, but at least I didn't email it mistakenly to a client or anything like that. But now, and then when I'd gone full-time, I took on the duty of getting our son out of bed and off to school, which meant I was then up very early and I would then write in the mornings. And I've kind of kept that up, even though he's now managing himself reasonably well, so that I will get up and I will write in the morning. I'll usually go out of the house to write if I can. I found I write better away from the desktop because there were just too many internet-related distractions.
So you're an outside world is less distraction than inside world person?
Yeah, well, the thing is, the outside world shrinks down to the size of my headphones at the point where I'm writing. So I will usually try and go out to some coffee place and write there, because it's just, I'm very focused at that point. I write very well on trains. I can write in hotels. I mean, I am, as long as the environment isn't too noisy. I mean, like very loud music or loud human voices that cut through noise cancelling headphones are too much for me. But in general, I shrink down to the size of the inside of my head, basically, when I start writing, and then I can just tunnel in and get stuff done kind of no matter where, as long as I've just got that much space and a place to put the laptop.
Is there a time of day where your brain says enough already, or does it move?
Well, I mean, on the basis that I've been able to write at whenever, then no. What will happen is I have basically a well of inspiration, and I will write, and then I will usually at the end of a beat or at the end of a chapter, right, the well is now dry, and I need to leave it to refill for the next day or the next session. And sometimes I can get multiple sessions in a day, but usually that's like very early or very late in a book when it's going very quickly. Because the middle drags for me, which I think is a thing a lot of writers find. But there's always something else. Once you're on the conveyor belt, there will be edits, there will be proofs, there will be admin, there will be some such business.
But with all of those, you
do in the afternoons, like this, for example.
Do find that there's an out breath. Sort of, the well needs time to refill.
Yes, but it's not a time of day or anything like that related. It's purely to do with, right, you have now written the stuff that was in your head queued up. And from experience, if I push it, the quality of stuff that I then write goes down because I know the shape of what happens, but I don't have the texture of it sort of properly ready to go.
If I handed you a magic wand and got you to choose writing conditions that could just reliably be there, would it be a particular cafe space? Would it be what are the most important things? What are the things that you would wish for?
I mean, absolutely, ideally, it would be nice to have the sort of a cafe space is guaranteed to be reasonably quiet. I mean, honestly, you can't find anywhere these days that doesn't have some sort of background music on, but yeah, there's music, and there are some places I no longer go to because they always play the music very loud, and apparently that's kind of like, that's mandated by whatever the company is that owns that chain. So they literally say, we are not allowed to turn this down, even though it's 9 o'clock and you're literally the only person in the place.
Yeah.
So that's right out, because there are times when I'm writing an action scene and I'll have loud actiony music and it won't matter. But also if I'm writing a more reflective scene and I'm using music more appropriate to that, then if someone's playing a saxophone in your ear at top volume, that's a bit distracting. It's nice to have some, I would say, some decent coffee, but honestly I have zero taste in coffee, so just some coffee, I guess.
It just has to exist as coffee.
And then just having, because I mean, what I will also do if I'm writing in Leeds, which is the nearest large town, I'll write, say, 8 to 10. And then I'll take a break and I'll just go for a bit of a perambulate and visit a couple of shops in town, like, the local comics shop and that kind of thing. And then I'll come back and, I'll have recharged a bit inspiration wise, and I'll carry on and get a second session in. So having other things in the vicinity that I can just go and have just take a break and do something else, which isn't just sitting in the same place, is quite useful.
One last work question before I realise we will need to talk about what's coming up next and the future before we finish. But I'd love to know, you mentioned having to get your son up and doing dad things. What happens with the weekends? Do you do a sort of 9 to 5, or are you an everyday person? Well,
I mean, back a while ago, when this, I think it's like pre 2020. I guess, it wouldn't be writing at the weekends. Not necessarily because we were doing lots of family stuff or anything like that, but just like, those are the weekends. I'll write in the weekdays. Around the pandemic, I very much doubled down on the writing because that was a good way of getting away from the world. And I started, when things opened up again, I'm now going to go and write, and I can write. I discovered that, the local Costa is open early on a Sunday and things like that. So I now tend to get a writing slot in on the Saturday and the Sunday if I can, if there's nothing else going on. And I don't think that's, I mean, we're talking about writing health and things like that. I have this standard, rather jokey line that I'm extremely, that I basically can't not write, and that I can go about 2 weeks without writing new stuff, not counting editing, not counting anything like that, actually writing a new thing. 2 weeks is about my limit before I get very, very twitchy. And my joke is that this is psychologically unhealthy and commercially very convenient. And it is a joke, but it's also, I think, very true. And I am kind of looking at myself at the moment thinking, look, you're right. You're kind of doing this 7 days a week writing. And, I've got, as well as a reputation for just writing very fast and writing lots of stuff, I've got a reputation that I deliver very early. The publishers are now taking note of and kind of inching the deadlines forwards, which is the thing that everyone will literally tell you why you don't deliver early, and they kind of wish. So I don't necessarily know that I would hold myself up as a paragon of writing craft, because I'm a little worried that at some point I'm going to kind of burn out or something like that. I mean, I think the one thing I would say is in my favour, though, is that I am also not a tormented writer, in any way. I enormously enjoy the act of writing. I really, really get a big buzz out of coming out of a second thinking that was a really good chapter. I had a lot of fun with that. My characters less so.
And it's nice to know that worry is still there, because people who do not even yet dream of being a millionth as prolific as you are already worrying. What if it all goes away? What if, what if?
I mean, the thing is, it always is going to go away. But at that point, if there is something to go away, then at least it was there in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, I'm sure I will run into some sort of lack of ideas or inspiration or ability to write or something like that. It hasn't happened yet. And I think the fact that I am enjoying myself doing it is a major factor in that.
A really quick other thing about writing health, and please by all means disagree with me, but the thing that I've heard myself saying to family and friends is, you get better Rachel for your money if I have done a bit of writing most days.
God, yes. Yes. I mean, even if it's gone, I say I can't go 2 weeks without writing something new, but also, I mean, if I've gone a day and I've not got something done in that day, I do get a bit shirty. And if for whatever reason I am prevented from getting stuff done, I get very twitchy because, I've got a lot I want to do. I kind of feel I don't have the time not to be writing. I mean, we're talking now, I've been writing all morning. I've got a whole chapter done that I'm really rather chuffed with. So I'm in a very good mood. And even it also goes down, we were talking about those niggling moments where you think, something is not working with this chapter. I'm going to have to do something with it. My mood really takes a hit if that is the case. Until I've solved that problem, there is a big chunk of my head that's chewing away at it, and therefore I'm very distracted and a bit irritable and that kind of thing. And I'm aware of that, and I try and compensate for it, but it's definitely a thing.
What would you say to the families of writers dealing with somebody who's like...
Well, it's difficult. I mean, I don't think I'm the person to talk that because I obviously have a bit of a vested interest in, obviously you should let the writer have whatever they want, which I don't think is necessarily the case.
And bring them another cup of coffee.
I mean, I think it needs to be a bit of a two-way understanding, in that I think one of the problems with writing and family is it is very easy, especially if you are not like the breadwinner from the writing and things like that. It's very easy for the writing to get dismissed as, oh, well, that's your hobby, and it can kind of go to the back of the queue after whatever else needs to be done, at which point you never get to write. It's really easy to displace writing, and trying to get someone to understand, right, this is my time and or place when I'm writing, and please do not disturb me when I'm doing it. And that, that's a conversation you really need to have quite openly, I think. At the same time, as a writer, you kind of need to understand that, right, just because you are feeling very irritable because your chapter isn't working doesn't give you, you are not the great auteur who gets to kind of storm about the house, slamming the doors and throwing coffee cups and things like that. It's, it is a two-way street.
As with our audiences talking about Tabletop at the beginning, it's always a dialogue. A quick word about the future, because you've got quite a lot of it happening very soon. You're touring.
Technically, I've got as much of the future as everyone else.
Well, that's a bigger question, to which I will dedicate a much longer episode.
Sorry, I cannot help being pedantic.
Please do not help being pedantic, but do talk to me about the tour.
Well, yes, so we've got the new standalone sci-fi book Shroud is coming out end of February, beginning of March. I've got a smallish book tour, and I should probably reel out the places now, and I cannot remember all of them.
Just tell us where to look for them.
If you go on to adriantchaikovsky.com, that's got them all up there. So it's all in the UK. I know I'm starting in Leeds and then going up to Edinburgh and finishing off in London at the end of that week. And yeah, I mean, if I'm somewhere near where any of your listeners are, please do come along. Shroud is a lot of fun in a sort of a dreadful kind of way. It's from the point of view of the human characters, it is a phenomenally harrowing survival story on a horrible, horrible alien planet. And the point of view of the alien characters, it's a jolly first contact romp.
Anything else you'd like to get in before we finish?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to reinforce the meanness of everything, later on in the year, the third book in the Dogs of War series, Bee Speaker, is coming out. I think that's June-ish. There's a new novella called The Hungry Gods, which is basically what happens when all those billionaires who ruined Earth and went to space come back to Earth having ruined space. So that's jolly.
And topical.
And then there's also going to be, at some point during the year, a short work in the Tyrant Philosophers series called Lives of Bitter Rain. So not quite as busy year as last year, actually, but still busy. He says with a straight face.
It's a beautiful portrait of busy. Adrian Tchaikovsky, the scorpion, the frog. Thank you for joining the Writers' Gym.
No, thank you.
You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr. Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London, as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.